Hello and welcome to the Movie Moulin podcast. As always, I am your host, Ben Yenny, and this is the podcast where we have serious people talk about serious topics in a somewhat silly way, occasionally, at least. And we always talk about the money behind the movie industry. And there are few more knowledgeable on that topic than my guest today, who is Bruce Nash. Bruce is the founder and head of thenumbers.com, which, in my opinion, is still the best place to get your movie metrics. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ben. It's really nice to be here. Good to see you, as always. Yeah, thank you for having me on.
No problem. So for those who don't know, could you say a little bit about what The Numbers actually is?
Yeah, of course. So as many people will know, but if you're new to it, The Numbers is a movie website. We track box office and movie release schedules and other stuff, really created with the idea of trying to cover as much of the industry as possible, particularly in terms of box office, although we've expanded it over the years to cover the home market and now streaming. And I would say that the thing that really distinguishes it is that we try to do it from a analytical perspective. So everything that we do, as we put it into our now fairly huge database, we're thinking about how do we use that to enhance our ability to understand the industry. So we have things like a movie classification system, which is specifically designed to answer questions like how are horror movies doing, how are science fiction movies doing, how are animated movies doing, and allowing us to do then from that predictions about what, looking ahead in the next week or so, the Marvels movie is about to do, and ultimately, how is the industry looking? What is the projected box office for the rest of the year or through 2024? So yeah, really numbers. Try to gather as much, report them as quickly as possible, and I think we're the first to come out with the daily numbers each day. But also, to have that kind of deep dive into the analytical side as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I personally use it for my consulting services, and I've also known Bruce for years at this point, and I've even done a little bit of consulting for him, through him, I suppose. So how are you different from someplace like IMDb or Box Office Mojo?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think there's a few things. So, first of all, that idea that we're really built for the analytics is important. So it's trying to classify things in a way that's going to be usable to do predictions. Is really one of the ways that we distinguish ourselves. I mentioned that we have things like the video release schedule. We track all of the releases now on the streaming platforms. So everything that's coming up on Netflix, you'll find, along with Disney Plus and Peacock and Paramount Plus and Max. And we're sort of slowly building that into a much more comprehensive database on TV shows in general. So one of my team has very patiently entered every episode of The Simpsons, and we're building that out across the TV space, but again bringing that kind of analytical perspective to it. So classifying TV shows, adding in, we have a very extensive keyword system to identify particular plot points in movies, and again in on the TV side of things as well. So that's really kind of the second part. And then the third thing, honestly, is we're not part of Amazon, and we have that really actually gives us quite a lot of flexibility. I think a lot of people will know that Mojo used to be free, and then they took, I don't know, 75% of it basically behind a paywall and said, well, okay, this is now just part of IMDb Pro. I'm going to use it to promote IMDb Pro. And, you know, we're not sort of constrained in that way. Of course, ultimately we have to make money, but, you know, we're really looking at it as how do we meet the needs of our customers, try to make as much of it free as we possibly can. And then, you know, obviously around that, we've got a data licensing business, Opus Data. We have our Numbers Business Report, our magazine, which is new. We just came out with that last month. Hard at work on issue 2 for November right now. So building things around that, but keeping the core as being, you know, this central place that people can come to find the latest box office and analysis. And as I say, more and more on streaming and that market as well.
Yeah. It's good to hear that you're doing stuff with television. Do you actually like index the Nielsen ratings to it or anything along those lines?
Not right now. What we're gathering the all of the streaming charts. We started, and then Netflix changed the charts that they published, and we sort of have rejiggered that, but we are gathering all that data, and we're going to be building that out on the site. Well, so you know, we'll have, you know, the ability to see what are the most successful shows on Max, for example, based on what has been in their top 15 or 10 or whatever they do every day, you know, going back from when they started to do those rankings on the different platforms.
I mean, I know that a lot of the people listening would probably much rather have actual view counts than anything on that, but and I'm sure you and I both would as well, but that unfortunately only exists in the servers of Netflix itself and is not publicly available at all. So given that, how do you, so you mentioned a little bit about using the top 10 and the top 20 data metrics from these streamers. Is there anything else you do to source data from streamers specifically?
So on the streaming side, that is about it. I mean, of course, we're also looking at the financial side of that, which, you know, actually, you know, in many ways, it doesn't really matter how many people watch the show on Netflix. It matters what Netflix has paid you for the rights to that show. You know, of course, you know, for season 2 and season 3, that can make a big difference. You know, but you know, we are looking at what Netflix are paying for shows, well, particularly for movies. And we work with a lot of independent filmmakers on doing our comp analysis reports, which is, we don't like to call them predictions about how their movies are going to make, because there are many factors, and I know that you have a whole podcast devoted to the many topics around that. But you know, we are looking at what they're paying for independent documentaries, what they're paying for independent features, how much they're paying to you know, buy movies out of Sundance and the other festivals. So we're gathering all of that data and building models around that, so that we can say to you know, a client, you know, if you're making this independent film and you get bought out of a festival, this is sort of the financial model that you would have. If you don't get bought from a festival, then this is the financial model that you would have. And obviously streamers are now a really important part of that, because probably, you know, in a given festival season, they're buying, you know, at least half of the films that are being, you know, bought out of festivals. They're not really being bought quite so much by Focus Features and what is now, of course, Searchlight Pictures. You know, in the way that happened, you know, a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, they Focus, Searchlight, Sony Classics, all of them do still buy stuff, but not to the same degree that they used to. And even if they do end up buying it, a decent percentage of the time they'll end up on a streamer after a theatrical and some other physical that they might do, which is becoming, which died a lot more recently than people realize. I think it's still not dead, it's just not good, not even what it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, that's actually something we're looking into. And we I actually just came off of a meeting where we were discussing this very topic. It's something that we're going to look at actually probably in the December issue of the Numbers Business Report. Is what has happened to independent box office in the post-pandemic world? Because you could be pretty, prior to the pandemic, you could be pretty certain that about 5% of box office earnings in the domestic market in North America was going to come from independent film. Some of them, very small independent films that we're going to play in 5 or 6 theaters for a few weeks and maybe earn $25,000-$30,000.
That would be great for 5 or 6 theaters.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that would be a nice run for an independent film. But there were a lot of films that kind of did that kind of business, and we're not really seeing that. Certainly in what's getting reported to us. And so the question that we're asking is, has that stopped? Are these films just not making that kind of money? Is it that the distributors, they sat at home during the pandemic and thought, what do I want to do with my life? And they decided that one of the things they didn't want to do was to compile all those numbers and send it out to the press every Sunday morning. So it may be that it's just not being reported anymore. Or it could be something else, that those films, are now just going to, they've recognized that it's hard to build much momentum out of theatrical release, and that it's better to just, put all of your efforts into promoting it online, getting it onto, transactional VOD platform, and that's where you're going to make your best returns, particularly with people perhaps not going back to theaters in the numbers that you need, or the theater that would be the right place to play that film no longer being in business. And certainly
that's a big issue.
We've seen a lot of independent theaters around where we are just shut up shop. And that's a big issue, I think, for independent film too.
It is. I mean, I've had a hand in booking 12 or 13 different theatrical releases, and most of that, the only reason we were able to do that is we were able to partner with individual theaters and small chains that were able to take the film on a high commission on their end. And since then, a lot of those have closed their doors, and that's not just a problem for indie films, but I believe the industry as a whole. Now, are you seeing a lot of people still going to the theater, even for the marquee releases? Like, obviously, we saw a lot with Barbenheimer, but beyond that, are you seeing much of a return to theaters?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the big films, the market is about 85% of it what it was pre-pandemic. If you take into it, that's revenue. So ticket prices have increased somewhat, not massively, but along with everything else, of course, they've been up, from an average of $9 to $10, that kind of change. The US population has grown a little bit, so I think you could say that ticket sales are down more than that, and there are definitely, one of the things that we've seen as an issue is that the studios, and this particularly coming out of the pandemic, they decided to really sort of squeeze all their films into very narrow times of year, because they were expecting to have potentially increases in COVID cases, shutdowns, lockdowns, and theaters being forced to close. And so, when they're planning out, a year in advance, and they say, well, we're not really sure that theaters are even going to be open in October and November 2023, let's say. So they say, okay, well, we'll move everything, make sure we're not releasing anything in those months, because that's just too risky. And so what we've seen is, you'll get a spike. You'll have, from Super Mario through Barbie and Oppenheimer, really a big run of really, high profile movies. And then it kind of goes off a cliff in August, September, doesn't really come back in October. And then, November, around Thanksgiving, you start to get some films again. And the issue with that is you've got this big chunk in the middle of the year, well, let's say August to October, but there's nothing really coming out. People get out of the habit of going to the theater every week or every couple of weeks, and then it takes something really big to get them back into the habit of going. So that I think is one of the big issues, is that seasonality is now more of an issue than it used to be.
But hasn't it always been somewhat of an issue?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, certainly, August and September have always been slow for new releases. But there's really been, times when there's been almost nothing coming out of any real note. And I think that is a change. And, to an extent, of course, that vacuum has been filled with, just recently the Taylor Swift Eras Tour movie, which, was, landed in a region where it could just have theaters to itself for a weekend and really sort of for 2 weekends. And that would be hard for a movie like that to do that and to just go to theaters, hey, we're here, and for every theater in the country to say, that's great, we're going to book you. No uphill battle in getting that film into theaters once it was announced.
That's true. And I think there is a demand for people to still get out of the house and see stuff. My mom saw the Taylor Swift Eras Tour, which I thought was strange, but she did, with the girl next door, like, yay, hi. But I don't think that's something that would have really happened even like a year or two before the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, you can't, I think someone like Taylor Swift becomes, a phenomenon, in her own right. But I think you're right that it was an opportunity to do something that would become a real event, and that seems to be what people are really clamoring for. Not, we saw it just this last weekend with Five Nights at Freddy's, which is and this I will say, I'm probably the wrong demographic. It kind of passed me by. I'd never heard of it until the movie was announced, and even then I thought it was, this video game that I've never heard of, never heard anybody really speak of, but it has a legion of fans that I'm just not connected with, and they were really
clearly
excited.
Don't watch YouTube.
I guess not.
But no, I agree. It's never been my thing. Five Nights is an interesting one, or FNAF, I suppose the kids say. In that it started almost as a playable version of a creepy movie, and now it's a non-playable version of a passable creepy movie. From what I hear, I haven't seen it. Probably not going to see it, honestly. Do you have any way of tracking transactional numbers, TVOD? Because I'll probably say that later.
Yes, we do. Now we don't get we do get actual numbers from distributors, but under NDA they won't allow us to share them with anyone, of course. So what we do is we kind of set up a bit of a Chinese wall where we is that still a phrase we can use? I'm not sure. Anyway, we have a wall, a barrier between the data that we get on under NDA with actual numbers, and then on the other side we're gathering all of the rankings each day from the major transactional VOD platforms, so Apple Movies, Vudu, Google Play, and so forth, right? And so we're building up this record, this movie, and typically, we're not getting these numbers from the studios, so it's independent distributors who want to work with us in some capacity will share it so that we've got better data for them. They so their films may be at number 583 on Vudu, but we know that 583 on Vudu translated into $2,000 in spending on that title that week, and so that allows us to build out a model and say, this is what we think all of these films will have done from TVOD on this week. And then we map that against the market size, which is published by the DUG at the end of every quarter. and and adjust to make sure that our total sum of all transactional VOD spending matches the market size for the quarter, and that gives us pretty good numbers. There's some challenges now with premium VOD and the way that films are being released, but it's pretty good from what we've seen of the actual numbers compared to what our model is producing. And we can do that for basically any film. We're tracking 10,000 films every week on that system.
Yeah, that at some point you have enough of a sampling of the total market that you've got a pretty good assumption. It's not going to be right to the dollar, but it never would be anyway. So
right, yes. And well, as you know, there can be considerable delays in reporting and corrections and all of that. So so everybody's sort of flying a little blind. I mean, the one thing I will say, since I'm perhaps reaching new people with this information that we're gathering this data, is that we cannot use it for any sort of legal action. Often people come to us and they say, we think we've been ripped off. Can you give us the numbers that you have for this film? And we can give you those numbers, but they're complete estimates. We don't have any sort of inside view of this particular film, particularly for independent film. You might do particularly well on some platform for a totally random reason, right? It just sort of picks up a particular search term that somebody is likely to put into a particular search engine, that your particular film will pop up number 3 position, and somebody will see it who otherwise wouldn't. That kind of stuff is hard for us to model, and it can make a huge difference actually to the end result for a film. So I think we're very good when we in our comp analysis reports, we say find 20 similar films so we can tell you what a film like this is likely to do. Once we take the average on the comp analysis, then that number is pretty good, because we're averaging across a variety of films. If you take in one of those individual films, then it could be off by a fair margin if you happen to have had one of these breakout successes on a particular platform, or it's never actually shown up, but Vudu for whatever reason has said this is the number 10 film this week because they want to promote something, or do something screwy with that platform that week.
Yeah, I mean, there's also your distributor can actually take part in some seasonal discounts and promotions there, which will have a gigantic impact on the bottom line of that film, but it might also incur an additional ad spend, which means that while the sales go up, you might not actually make that much extra money on that period, but you'll more than likely make some extra money on the increased awareness from future periods.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. So it's one of those so much wind in the area you can't exactly tell what was blown over when by what.
Right.
No, that's really interesting. Do you do anything with Avon? Ad-supported video on demand?
It's the one thing that we haven't been able to crack so far. What we've seen anecdotally from our clients is that AVOD tends to not generate very much revenue for an individual film.
Most of the time.
Yeah. It tends to be more of a sort of more effective if you've got a library. And clearly on the AVOD platforms, if you look at it, they'll have a channel which is a particular producer sometimes of genre films, and clearly they're doing okay from that, but it's because they've got 30 films or 50 films or 1,000 films that are all in that genre, and people will happily put them on and watch them through the day. But for an individual film, that doesn't necessarily translate into a lot of revenue. But
that makes sense.
Yeah, curious what you've seen on that.
I've had a couple films that one notably that really overperformed on AVOD, and I have also been seeing a downward trend on transactional TVOD. And pretty much everybody on the distributor side is saying that the real money's in AVOD, but it might be our own blinders, because for a while we were saying that the real money's in catalog sales, which was true for distributors, but was not true for filmmakers, because if you sell 50 films at 1,000 each, yeah, you just made a pretty penny, but each of your filmmakers only made $700 to $800 on that, and that's not very good for them. So that's
Right.
it's kind of the paradox of distribution in a way, but it's those have been more what I've seen in general. Horror and creature features do really well on AVOD, as do urban crime thrillers, I believe is how they're categorized, especially on Tubi there. And it's really funny to see that urban crime thrillers, the success of them on Tubi and AVOD have actually changed the entire content strategy of some of the bigger outlets that used to make their bread and butter from that, like BET, All Black, or any of the more legacy Black channels. And they're actually focusing on higher brow, elevated, or Afrofuturist content, from what I've heard, at least. So it's one of those, again, it's kind of a whole ecosystem that changes in one area can sometimes result in unexpected effects. So that's what I've seen on the sales end. So we're almost done with where you source your data, but the one thing we haven't covered is physical media. Is there how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the same again. So we're looking at the, anything that's announced, and publicly available. We gather all of that information. We estimate market share for each title each week. We look at how much the discs are selling for, and then we eventually map that all back to the DEG numbers so that we've got the right market size for DVD and Blu-ray. And actually for Redbox as well, or the physical rentals we still do, although of course all of those are in such steep decline at the moment that it's an increasingly small share of revenue. And I don't think it's going to die out, but I think that there are going to be a smaller and smaller number of films that are going to come out that way, and they're going to kind of pick their channel when they do so. So, Redbox still rents quite a lot of sort of action thrillers, and they, still churn out those films and get them on Redbox. So I assume somebody's making some money there from that. But it's going to be those kind of niches rather than every independent film gets its DVD release, and that's a source of some sort of relatively guaranteed revenue.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly with, I think Best Buy just said they're not going to sell DVDs anymore.
Yeah.
So I think down to like Walmart and Amazon and maybe Target and their checkout counters, but, really very, very limited channels for getting DVDs into people's hands these days.
Yeah. I mean, there's still manufacturer on demand, MOD. I don't think that's going away anytime soon, but there's really not a ton of money in it at all. And you've got to be really careful with a brick and mortar retail release, because most of the time they don't actually buy the discs from you. They just consign them and they return what they don't use. And that can be really punishing if a title underperforms your expectations. And
Right.
it's
Because they don't want to take it unless you deliver 10,000 units or whatever it is, and then if they only sell 1,000, then you've just got 9,000 discs you've got to find a home for, right?
And at this point, that normally means destroy. It used to be that whatever was unsold, which was a lower percentage, would go to your Dollar Generals, your Walgreens, your supermarkets, all of that just down the line. So it wasn't really all that risky a proposition. But now that all those downline outlets have stopped, it's brutal for physical. So thanks for all that info on how you get your metrics. Out of curiosity, who actually goes to visit thenumbers.com?
So just a ton of people. So we get about 1 million visitors a week during the busy time. I think it's a little bit slower than that right now. And the vast majority are just big fans of movies, right? Who want to see how their film did at the box office yesterday. So that's sort of the big sort of numerically the largest component of our customers. And then, really anybody in the industry who needs data. So a lot of independent filmmakers, if we talk to anybody at the studios, they're using us, the distributors, the theaters, everyone is sort of checking in when they are looking. I think for that it sort of comes around partly the box office, but also the release schedules, where I think now we have the most complete, comprehensive theatrical release schedule, certainly for North America. And we're building that out as a global effort. So we're tracking, I think, about 15 territories around the world. If you go to a movie page on the numbers and click through on the international tab, you can see all of the international release dates for that film now. And then for our clients, we're licensing that data. So increasingly, and anybody at a studio or a distributor or a theater chain who needs that information, please get in contact, because we're trying to make that as much as possible a collaborative effort in the industry, because everybody knows how important it is, and it's really hard to do across, on a global basis, and nobody has, the complete answer to that yet. So that's something where we're investing a lot of effort right now, is to be really comprehensive on our relationship. So it's anybody who's kind of needs that information. As I say, lots of independent filmmakers will use it when they're doing their planning for their film, or trying to find out what their niche might be. And then generally anybody who's in the business of movies and needs some hard data will come to us.
That makes sense. Up to 1 million a week is a lot. I mean, if I was getting 1 million views on this podcast a week, I'd be like overjoyed. You can help. Like, comment, subscribe. Sorry, couldn't help the plug. Do you have any idea how much of a percentage are cinephiles and fans versus industry?
We're beginning to sort of really build that out. I would say, the sort of the 80-20 rule probably prevails as a good rule of thumb. So 80% is, a fan, 20% are in some way involved in the industry, which of course could include the usher at the local movie theater who just wants to know how busy their weekend is going to be, up to, the CEO of Walt Disney, probably goes there once in a while to see how their films are stacking up. So not to, suggest there's any difference between them as human beings, but, it sort of runs the gamut of, people who are involved in some way or another with the film business.
That's good. I remember being an usher at a movie theater, and that was always a little bit of a challenge to see who would actually be coming out in this small mountain town to see. I don't even remember what movies were playing. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I think, was the hellest of my weeks, but dating myself a little bit. You mentioned earlier that you have some insight to what genres perform well. And I'm sure that my audience would be unhappy if I didn't follow up on that.
Yeah, well, I think that the way I would think about that, really varies by, budget range of movie in particular, right? Because a big budget studio movie is going to perform very differently from an independent film at a much lower budget. And clearly there are genres at that lower budget range which are sort of fairly consistent performers. I already talked about action thrillers going through Redbox. I think that's sort of a dwindling niche, but I think it is one that's still stood the test of time. Horror, of course, does very well. So I think that there's some niches there that will work for low budget films fairly reliably, as long as you've got some catch that will actually get somebody to watch a trailer and say, okay, that looks pretty entertaining for 90 minutes. I'll pay $2 or $3 to rent that. So I think think about having a good hook for the audience, for your horror film, for your thriller. Sci-fi of course also works well there, and I think for that lean more onto the story than onto the special effects at low budget, because I think people see through those. But
especially
I think
the cheap ones.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure 2 years from now we'll be having a whole discussion about how AI has changed that. But for now, I think still that's it is important to have that kind of key idea that you can sell within a genre film. And then the other thing that really if you're not doing a genre film, if you're doing a drama or a documentary, those are films that really live and die by quality. And what we've found over the years is if you're looking to put together a drama, get every piece of advice you can on the quality of the script before you do anything, and take that feedback seriously. Because I think that where we've seen drama films break out, it's either that it really speaks to a very, very specific audience. Faith-based dramas can do quite well because their audience is really eager to see that kind of content and a particular message, or it's just so high quality that everyone is going to talk about it and say, well, this is this was a really moving story, or really touched me in some way. And to achieve that, the script is absolutely key, and you have to take feedback on that very seriously, even if it means chopping a beloved character that you've written and you think is the heart of the movie. If everyone says, well, they seem like it just doesn't work for me, then take that feedback seriously and adjust until you've got something that really resonates with an audience before you start committing that to film and start trying to edit it and bring it out the other end.
Completely. That makes sense. I know you and Stephen Follows did some articles for the American film market a couple years ago. And one of those was around dramas. And I know because people still send it to me. But I'm going to clip this out and start sending them this as well. But the dramas are significantly more execution dependent than your horrors, your action, or your family movie. The way I've heard it said is that they want either babes and blood for horror, girls and guns for action, or kids and dogs. Weirdly, it's always those three, and always the same distributors, which makes you look a little funny at them. But so do you think AI is going to have a big impact on international in particular?
I think there's some really interesting, corner cases that we're already beginning to see. Actually, I just noticed a headline this morning of the is it Fall, I think, or is it the Fall? About the two young women at the top of the tower. That they used AI technology, I think you could argue, to do the lip syncing for the international dubs on that, right? So they could, and it was pretty inexpensive. They could just package it for, you know, a German speaking film, and it would look as though they were speaking German through the entire film. And that was a nice little pocket film where you only had two, you know, main characters, and you know, there were things that you could do that made it efficient to do that kind of thing. I think that is a very interesting path for the industry, not necessarily trying to make, you know, a CGI AI generated movie out of your science fiction idea, but taking a film that is, you know, really well marketable for the North American market and making it more accessible around the world, you know, with that sort of augmentation. I think that's an interesting niche for the industry at this point.
I would agree with that.
Subtitling, you know, in different languages, again, can be very expensive, and, you know, prohibitive for getting your film into, you know, let's say Eastern Europe, where, you know, there are many different languages, and you might say, well, I can't really afford to translate this into Slovenian on the hope that somebody pays me, you know, for Slovenian rights for this. But if you can feed it into a system that will write those subtitles at very low cost, then I think that becomes, you know, pretty interesting for opening up new markets too.
I would agree. Most of the time when I've done international sales that would require some new translation of the subtitle, I haven't advised the filmmaker to do it until we've made the sale and there's been an MG on it. So they might have to cash flow the money, but they're going to get the money. It's or we are going to get the money and we'll pay for it. One of the two. The biggest thing I've seen a lot of those from is airlines as well. Airlines you have to generally deliver like 8 languages with. And that's one I think a lot of filmmakers don't think about. Yeah. Sorry, Bruce, that was less for you and more for the audience. But
I mean, that's very interesting. Yeah. That makes total sense.
Yeah. Do you think theatrical still matters for filmmakers, indie filmmakers specifically?
Yeah. See the December issue of the Numbers Business Report, where we hope to have a bit more of an answer to this.
Link in the comments. That's what
yeah. I think it's a really important and difficult to answer question at this point. Clearly, you know, we've been through this period of turbulence and we've come out with significantly fewer theaters that are a good match for independent films. And I think that's, to me, is the biggest kind of issue, because you're now having to get into, you know, AMC and Cinemark and so forth have survived actually fairly well, albeit, you know, some of them going through bankruptcy and restructuring and so on. But you know, the theaters are still there. But it's hard to get an independent film into an AMC theater very often. And so that, I think, is the big issue, that you know, the venues have gone away a little bit. The audience maybe isn't there in quite the same way. I mean, I think you could, you know, definitely we've seen some reluctance of some of the older audiences for coming back to theaters. So yeah, I think it's a real challenge. And you know, at the same time, you know, it's easier than ever to get your film out onto home market platforms, you know, whether it's AVOD, TVOD. You know, there's lots of platforms that are very happy to take films as long as they kind of meet a minimum, you know, quality requirement. But the big risk there is that you might, you know, you're going to be lost amongst, you know, a sea of other films that are taking the same approach. So yeah, I mean, and I, you know, definitely interested in your thoughts on this, but I think theatrical as a way of making money is probably very marginal at this point, but maybe a good way of just differentiating the film and getting, you know, some people to start seeing it and talking about it in a different context. So
I believe we're in agreement on this. The challenge these days isn't so much getting access to platforms, it's access, it's rising above the white noise of all the other content and just getting consumer attention on that.
Yeah.
And so it really becomes more of a marketing challenge than a distribution one. And it's more about figuring out how to keep your potential audience excited and get them to, and keep enough of their attention that they want to buy it, which part of which is just exposing them to the IP, to the film, at least 15 or 20 times at this point. Like, we just did a poster drop for a film that's not even done today, because we got a really cool new poster, and comicbook.com put it out there, and it's getting a little bit of traction, but I don't expect this to make me any money. I just hope it'll get some people, the IP in the back of some people's heads, so that once we get closer to the release, they might remember hearing something about that. And that's kind of the game. So you want to keep most of those customer interactions towards the very close to the release. But I wanted to do this one anyway because it's the first day of AFM, and I thought it might have some buyer spillover too. So, and Deadline doesn't tend to do poster drops. It has to be the fan sites normally.
Right. Yeah, this is something we're thinking about with the numbers, actually. I mean, to go back to our discussion of the audience on the numbers, we've resisted doing advertising on the numbers for a while. Hosting costs are sort of eating into our ability to do that, and obviously, from a business sense, it makes sense to do some advertising on the site. And we really are looking at what can we do to help movies succeed by advertising through us, or doing some promotion with us. So to kind of my sales hat for a moment, do reach out to us if you're looking to do that kind of promotion for a film. We're very recently open for business, and we're really looking to get some sense of how we can really help reach the right audience for a film, and learn about the best way to do that. So this at the moment isn't a big so much an opportunity for us to make money as it is for us a way to figure out what our value can be for a film to reach its targets. And then we'll make money once we know the value. Then we can say, well, this is how much you're going to have to pay for it. So
it is the right time to be talking to them, because like, even with Google, when they started, the click-throughs were only like 5 cents, maybe. That's not true anymore. And when you're still helping someone assess their own value, that's where you can actually get the best prices for you, and you also help them grow their business. So
right, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it has to make sense for our customers, in order for it to be a sustainable business for us. So it's very important to us.
So what other services do you offer besides the advertising to keep the lights on?
Yeah, so we've got the numbers website. We have the numbers business report, which I've already talked about a couple of times, is our magazine. And then we've got Opus Data, which is our data subscription service. So we license the data and that's mainly to like the major studios, streaming platforms, Wall Street, people in the sort of serious number crunching, side of things. That's actually technically the biggest part of our business, and really where the growth has been over the last few years, as of course everybody's caught up to the fact in that world that big data is really important, and they need to have good data that is actually going to drive their business decisions. So we've that's really been the sort of boom part of our business in the last sort of 3-4 years.
That makes sense. I know you also mentioned that you do the comp analysis and a few other things earlier in this
Right.
podcast.
Yeah. So independent filmmakers in particular, we do an analysis. Basically you come to us with your film, your pitch deck, a budget, a genre, and so forth, and then we find 20 comparable films. We run all the numbers that we've just been talking about for those 20, and use that to do our low, medium, high analysis for this film, what we think its potential is under those different distribution scenarios that we were talking about as well. Most films, of course, are not going to be bought out of Sundance, so normally we would recommend be realistic about the mix of films that you use, but we can give you a pretty good idea of what it's likely to do, not just at the box office, but also through these video channels and TV a little bit for some films, and ancillary revenues as well.
On the Sundance end, it's only about 2% of feature submissions that get in, according to their own data, I think. Do you happen to know how many of those films that get in actually get a meaningful deal out of it?
That's a great question. I would say probably about 10% would be my just rough guess on that.
That's where I was too, just as a guess.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
that's...
I mean, it's tough to go that route. And often the sales actually are kind of films that you would expect to sell anyway, because they're a director who's well established, or the cast is so stellar that it's going to play around the world. I think to go in with a film that is sort of from an unknown director with an unknown cast, it's got to be really, really spectacular to get a sale out of Sundance.
Yeah. Well, I know you have a heart out, and though I could keep talking to you for quite a while.
The hour's flown by here. Thank you.
Yes. So I'm going to move towards the to the 3 questions I ask all my guests. The first of which is, what are your top 3 favorite movies of all time as it stands right this second now? It can change in 15 seconds, can change in 10 minutes, but just what are you vibing on now?
Okay. Well, top 3 of all time. So The Shawshank Redemption. I would have to say one of the Lord of the Rings movies, probably The Fellowship of the Ring, would be there. And number 3 would be Moulin Rouge.
Ooh, that's a good one. Nobody said that one yet.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought of that old Baz Luhrmann film.
Yes. Yes, and of course all of them, for the time that you saw it and the context in which you saw it, kind of what it means to you personally. But yeah, those would be my top 3.
Good 3. Second, if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that advice be, and when would you give it to yourself? Doesn't have to change anything. Just what advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah. So the one thing that I've really realized, and I don't know when I would tell myself this, but is the importance of just being really, really, really good at one thing. That if there's a famous there's a famous graph that sort of shows up in every industry, in every context, what's called the power law graph, where if you look at the number 1 movie at the box office, on average it does twice as much as the number 2 movie and 3 times as much as the number 3 movie, and so on. It's this kind of hockey stick graph, and that applies to everything. The business profitability, the most profitable business in North America makes about twice as much as the second most profitable, and so on and so forth. And so whenever you're doing any sort of business venture, you have to think about what is the one thing that I'm going to have to be better at than anybody else, and how do I make sure that I really focus on doing that and making sure it's, of course, something that's useful to people. So that's what obviously I've tried to do, in my business. And I believe that's really, the general rule for being successful in almost any endeavor. Ask Michael Jordan.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and I think I have a blog on that way back in the archives too. The third and final question, hardest of the bunch. Where can people find you, and what are you looking for? I know we already kind of went over that, but
yeah. So it depends a little bit. So we're at thenumbers.com is the primary website. And
that's
info.
the numbers.com still.
Actually, we've now bought the numbers with no dash, so you can go to either. We haven't rebranded as thenumbers.com, but we have both that and the numbers.com. So either will take you there. Nash Info Services is our corporate site, nashinfoservices.com. And then opusdata.com is our data service business. And if you go to the numbers and actually forget I better look this up while I'm talking. So there's a pull down on the numbers website called Our Services, and that lists all of the different services that we have: our research services, our data services, the numbers business report, and so forth.
Awesome. Well, Bruce, thank you very much. You're welcome back anytime. And like I said, it has been fun. I hope that us nerding out on numbers hasn't lost all of my audience, but you know what? It was worth it.
What is the half-life of number nerding out? Yes, let's hope it's greater than 30 minutes.
Indeed.
Really great to talk to you anyway, Ben. It's been a lot of fun as always.
As always. So this has been the Movie Moolah podcast. If you liked it, please like, comment, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, hit that bell. If you are anywhere else, hit auto download. And don't forget my free independent film business resource package with a free investment deck template, 2 free ebooks, and a whole lot more. Thanks very much, and see you next week.